Welcome to Voting for Change. My name is Jake, and I'm joined today by the Vice President of Fair Vote Canada BC's chapter, Rani Earnhart. Rani, fantastic. Thank you for agreeing to come on the show with us.
My pleasure.
All right, so to get started, how did you first get involved in the campaign?
Well, it kind of goes back a ways. I've been involved in environmental issues for some time, and then when I came to BC, I started stumping for candidates that I believed in. And I was knocking on doors a lot and talking to people about the issues that mattered, talking about my candidate. And I'd hear the same kind of message over and over again that, yeah, I'd like to vote for your candidate, but you know, I don't think they're going to win, and I don't want this other guy to get in, so I'm going to vote for this other person. It's this kind of strategic voting messaging, and you get tired of that, and it's very discouraging. And then you also get the kind of voter that says, well, you know, I'm really not interested in that politics. It doesn't make any difference what I do. So then I was at a meeting of a social action group that I belong to. This was just a little over a year ago, and they were going around the room and asking, what campaigns, what specifically you wanted to work on in the coming year. And at that point, the referendum for BC electoral reform had been announced. And so I piped up and said, my issue this year is electoral reform for BC, because I think that is the best way to move forward on the issues that matter to me. And that's what the record shows. And the more I've studied these issues and what I learn along the way, I'm more and more convinced that that is the keystone issue to moving forward on many, many, many areas.
So the base that you're going to move forward on is this proportional representation because you think it can serve all of these other social causes that you're interested in forwarding?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what can we expect to see from Fair Vote Canada BC in the next coming months?
So right now there's a number of groups working for proportional representation, and each group has their own niche, and so we all kind of do different and complementary things. So Fair Vote Canada's niche is what we call the ground game, very much grassroots organizing, big emphasis on education. A new term that I've heard coined recently is, they call it deep canvassing. That's when you talk to people one-on-one, face-to-face, and you can have an in-depth conversation and really get to the gist of the values and why you think this is important, and listen to people. It's very important to listen to people. So we're really concentrating on the ground game, activities like door-to-door canvassing, tabling at fairs and markets, a lot of public speaking engagements, just getting out there in the community. We've got over 30 chapters spanning all across BC doing these kinds of activities.
So it sounds like there's a lot of feedback going on. So you're not just putting out information, you're actively trying to collect it. And how do you make use of that?
It's more a technique for talking to people. If you need to listen to people's perspectives, because proportional representation can help many different people in many different ways. It's multifaceted. It's about listening to people's voices. So it's important that we listen to people's voices in promoting it. So if I sense from someone some particular interest area, I can try to explain how proportional representation would help in that area. And it doesn't really matter if it's my pet peeve or not, it's theirs, and that's what's important. So it's important to listen so that we can explain how the benefits of PR work for the particular person we're talking to.
Okay, well that seems important. Being able to connect with an issue personally definitely makes you more involved with it. Okay. Well, tell me, what can we expect in terms of advocacy from the pro groups and the opponent groups going forward?
So as I said, the different pro groups have their different niche. I talked about Fair Vote Canada. Other groups have their niches. There's Lead Now and Dogwood are getting active, and they're going to be doing a lot of phone calls. A lot of groups are reaching out to their lists. The NDP party and the Green Party are active as well, and that's something new in this referendum that we haven't had before in the previous referendums here in BC, is the active involvement of the provincial party groups. And they'll mainly be reaching out to their voters, a lot of phone calls, some targeted door knocking. Education campaign, NDP just put out some great stuff on their website. Green Party has stuff on their website too.
Are you working extensively with the parties, or is it with individuals within the party framework? Not
really extensively with the parties, no. all on the same boat, but we're all doing our own thing. They're reaching their lists. So it's just good for me to know what other people are doing so that we don't overlap areas like in door knocking, but generally no, there isn't collaboration between us. The official proponent group also has their big niche. They're going to be doing a lot of media and ads. They have a big email campaign, big phone campaign. They have a texting campaign. So they'll be reaching different people. Each group will be reaching different people. And you asked me about the opponent groups. I don't know as much there. I don't have as much to contribute. But my sense is that the campaign will really heat up come September. There's not a lot. There was some early information coming out. There's some activity on Facebook from the no side, but the bulk of the campaign is going to be rolling out in September and October, primarily in the last 6 weeks of the campaign. That's when we could see a lot of money being spent in media ads, things that have broad reach. That's what we expect to be seeing from the No group. I can't really say how it'll come out.
Well, I think I can speak to that. I have noticed on both the yes and the no side some advertisements being put out online already.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I wanted to speak to you about was the rhetoric that we're seeing emerging at the very beginning of the heated campaign season.
Yeah.
So one thing that we hear a lot from on the proponent side of proportional representation is that the current system is, and I see this word a lot, broken or not serving the people. Can you speak to this? How much do you agree with that term being used? Would you use it?
I do agree with the sentiment of the tone. Whether I use that term kind of depends who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to someone I know nothing about their views, I might not choose to use that word because Canadians can be a very proud lot. I mean, we have a good reason to be proud of our country. And many people think the system is not broken, it's working great. So I'd rather stress the principles of democracy. And when using the word broken, it's with respect to the principles of democracy and how what people think is happening with their votes counting isn't really happening. And not everybody knows that. So if you explain to people that a party can get a majority of the power with less than 40% of the popular vote, that's not common knowledge, and that's the kind of education we want to do out there.
Right.
And that's what makes the system broken, is that a lot of people's votes are wasted. They're either voting for somebody they don't even like in the first place, strategic voting, or they're voting for a candidate that doesn't win, and nobody in the party that they like is representing them anywhere near them geographically in our current system.
So definitely, whether or not you use the term broken, you can agree that there are certain facets of our democracy that could certainly be fine-tuned.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, I want to ask you another question. One of the things that I'm seeing, at least in the early advertisement stage, is that there's, I don't want to say misinformation, but from both sides I'm seeing very, very different takes on information that you think would be available. So for example, what I'm thinking of right now is that, hang on. What I'm thinking of right now in terms of this is that some MPs and MLAs who have been discussing the issue have been saying that local representation for rural areas is at stake. And we've seen people go very different ways on both sides of the spectrum here. Some saying that local representation in rural areas is going to be strengthened after the referendum if we choose to adopt a PR system, and some are saying that these people are chancing to lose so much and so much local representation. What is your take on this?
Well, I'd be happy to talk about that. I am on the side of pro-rep, so I do believe that local representation for rural areas will increase under proportional representation. I'd be glad to explain why a little bit. So if you look now, and you look at these large rural swaths of British Columbia in the north and in the east, and you look at it as a colored map according to the parties that have representation. Right now, people have a local MLA, but if you voted for the NDP and you're somewhere in a vast northeast area of this province, there's no NDP in office anywhere near where you live.
No.
So yet there's plenty of NDP voters out there. Not everybody out there voted Liberal. Not everybody on Vancouver Island voted NDP. So there isn't a mix of MLAs that represent people's values geographically. There's been some guarantees in the legislation that was passed and the rules that were passed governing this referendum. There's certain basic principles that were guaranteed to be followed for any of the systems that are on our ballot or would be chosen, or the details of them that would be chosen for BC. And one of those principles is that no region will reduce their representation. So there will be no reduction in MLAs in rural areas.
Okay, and that's
this
important.
Is a guarantee.
Right, we've seen that in the report put out by David Eby. And that, I got to say, that's very important to me because I'm from a rural riding. I'm from Vernon. So when I hear about at least people in power saying that my vote might be diminished, I can see why people would be concerned. And you have to feel for these people. You talk a lot in terms of listening and having that active feedback. So from what it sounds like, at least according to you right now, that won't be the case. But for people hearing this from the proponent, from the opponent advertising rather, what advice can you give them to help discern the good information from the bad information?
That's a good question. One thing I'd like to encourage people to do is wait. There will be a voter package coming out from Elections BC. Elections BC is an independent, non-partisan body. They promise to present all sides of the arguments equally. And I hear that's coming out September 10th. It's going to be mailed out across the province to every registered voter. Will get this package. So if people are listening to me and they don't really believe my messaging, I will encourage them to wait for that package in the mail. Keep an eye on the Elections BC website. Go through that material because it will explain more the mechanics of how this works. And if anything, hopefully that will convince them of this issue of regional representation. Absolutely.
So definitely make sure that you pay attention to the mail out that you're going to be receiving come. When can they expect that?
I heard it's heading out September 10th.
Okay, so sometime in the near future they should be getting that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, can you talk a bit about the boundaries of what the pro side and the opponent side can say? It seems like, at least to me, from what I've seen in the early ads, that it seems to be a bit of a free-for-all. Is there any limits? Are these people going to be held accountable on both sides for promising some kind of panacea for our problems, or for projecting this as the end of days if this goes through? Is there any kind of reins on this?
To the best of my knowledge, honestly, no. And I agree with you. It is a bit of a free-for-all. We are in a country of free speech, and I've heard some rhetoric coming from people that I flat out disagree with, and they might disagree with some of my rhetoric. That's why it's so important to back up what you say sometimes with facts. And proportional representation is not a new concept, and it is implemented in over 90 countries worldwide. So a lot of the information that we move forward, like benefits on environmental issues, economic issues, we can back up with statistics that have been generated from the countries that have PR in comparison to the countries that are running under first past the post. And there's actual statistics and metrics that have been developed over long periods of time, like up to 50 years, demonstrating that the world does not end when we have proportional representation, that decision-making continues to happen, and so forth and so on. So there's no real watchdog on this. I know that Fair Vote Canada is in the process of putting up on our site, you can look on our site, fairvote.ca, and there will be a section called Fact Checker soon. And on this Fact Checker page, there's going to be a lot of that kind of information that you're looking for, rebuttals of information that came out in the media from people on both sides. And it'll say, well, actually, the truth is, and then it'll back it up with the facts to negate or agree with what's being said out there. So look for the fact checker
Exactly.
on the Fair Vote website.
You'd certainly encourage people to have a look at both sides of the argument and come to some kind of reasoned conclusion on their own based on the facts that they're being presented.
And if they want neutral information, they should lean towards Elections BC because that is their job, and they will be having a big campaign. In addition to the mailouts, they will be having public media campaign, educational on the issues in this referendum.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Rani. It has been a pleasure to have you here. Again, this is Jake, and this has been Voting for Change.